Most people believe they think logically. They believe they know why things happen. They believe their identity is stable and their reasoning is solid. David Hume calmly questioned all of that. He argued that cause and effect may not be something we ever truly see, that the self may not be a fixed thing at all, and that reason itself is weaker than we imagine. What he uncovered was not chaos, but a completely new understanding of how the human mind actually works. Tonight, we slowly enter the philosophy that reshaped how we think about knowledge, belief, and certainty itself. David Hume begins his philosophy with a quiet but radical question. What can a human mind truly know? Not what it hopes to know, not what tradition claims, not what religion promises, but what can actually be justified through experience. Hume believed that most philosophical confusion comes from assuming the mind has access to hidden truths beyond what it experiences. Instead of starting with grand theories about reality, he chose to examine the mind itself. How does it form ideas? Where do beliefs come from? Why do we trust certain things as certain? He approached philosophy almost like a scientist studying human nature. Rather than speculating about invisible substances or eternal structures, he focused on observation. He believed the mind should be studied the same way we study the physical world, carefully, patiently, and without assumption. At the foundation of Hume's philosophy lies a simple distinction between impressions and ideas. Impressions are the immediate experiences we have. The feeling of warmth from sunlight, the sound of rain, the sensation of hunger, the emotion of joy or anger. These are vivid and direct. Ideas are different. Ideas are faint copies of impressions. When you remember the warmth of sunlight, the memory is less intense than the actual feeling. When you imagine anger, it is weaker than real anger. According to Hume, every idea in the mind must originate from some impression. This principle has powerful consequences. If someone claims to have an idea that cannot be traced back to any experience, Hume would question whether that idea truly has meaning. He believed many philosophical concepts fail this test. For example, when people speak about substance as something existing beneath appearances, Hume asked what impression produced this idea. We see colors, shapes, textures, and motion. But do we ever experience an invisible substance beyond these qualities? If not, then perhaps the idea is only a mental habit rather than a discovered truth. Hume applied this method to the idea of the self. Most people assume there is a stable inner core that remains identical through time, a permanent identity that owns thoughts and experiences. Hume carefully examined his own mind and found something surprising. Whenever he looked inward, he never encountered a fixed self. He only found particular experiences, sensations, emotions, memories, thoughts. He concluded that the self is not a single unchanging substance. It is a bundle of perceptions constantly changing and flowing. The mind resembles a theater where impressions appear and disappear rapidly. The sense of personal identity arises from memory and habit connecting these experiences together. This idea challenges the comforting belief in a solid inner essence. For Hume, identity is constructed from continuity of experience rather than grounded in an eternal core. He then turned to one of the most important concepts in human thinking: cause and effect. Every day, people assume that certain events cause others. Fire causes heat. Pushing a door causes it to open. Dropping an object causes it to fall. But Hume asked a careful question. What do we actually observe when we say one thing causes another? When we see a match ignite and then produce flame, we observe one event followed by another. We notice constant conjunction. The flame regularly follows the striking motion. But do we ever perceive necessary connection itself? Do we see the power binding cause to effect? Hume argued that we do not. We only observe sequences. The mind then forms a habit. After seeing repeated patterns, we expect the second event to follow the first. This expectation feels natural and certain, yet it is based on psychological habit rather than logical proof. This insight leads to what later philosophers called the problem of induction. Humans assume that the future will resemble the past. Because the sun has risen every day, we expect it to rise tomorrow. Because objects have always fallen downward, we expect gravity to continue. But can this expectation be logically proven? Hume argued that it cannot. The belief that the future will resemble the past cannot be justified through reason alone. It is based on custom. The mind grows accustomed to patterns and projects them forward. This does not mean Hume rejected science or everyday life. He accepted that humans must rely on habit to function. Without expectation, practical life would collapse. His point was not to destroy knowledge, but to show its true foundation. Much of what humans call rational certainty rests on instinctive psychological patterns rather than logical necessity. Hume also examined religious belief using the same method. When people claim miracles occur, he asks what evidence supports such claims. Since experience shows that natural laws operate consistently, testimony about violations of these laws must overcome very strong contrary evidence. Hume argued that human tendency toward wonder and exaggeration often explains reports of miracles more plausibly than supernatural intervention. He believed that belief should always be proportioned to evidence. Strong claims require strong proof. Emotional desire for meaning does not count as evidence. Hume's philosophy, therefore, introduces deep intellectual humility. Human knowledge is limited to experience. Beyond experience lies speculation without firm grounding. Recognizing these limits prevents dogmatism and encourages careful reasoning. Yet Hume did not see this as depressing. Instead, he believed understanding human cognitive limits allows more balanced living. When people accept that certainty is rare, they become less rigid in debate and less arrogant in belief. He also explored morality with the same careful observation. Many philosophers before him argued that morality comes from reason discovering objective truths. Hume disagreed. He noticed that moral judgments feel more like emotions than logical deductions. When someone witnesses cruelty, they feel disapproval. When they observe kindness, they feel approval. Hume concluded that morality is rooted in sentiment rather than pure reason. Reason helps inform us about facts, but emotional response gives moral value. Without feeling, moral distinctions would have no force. From here, Hume begins developing a vision of human nature grounded not in abstract metaphysics, but in lived experience, habit, sentiment, and psychological pattern, gradually reshaping how knowledge, identity, and ethics are understood within the limits of human understanding. As Hume continues examining the human mind, he turns more carefully toward belief itself. If reason alone cannot guarantee that the future will resemble the past, and if cause and effect are grounded in habit rather than logical necessity, then why do our beliefs feel so strong and stable? Why does the expectation that the sun will rise tomorrow feel almost certain? Hume explains that belief is not simply an idea. It is an idea felt with greater liveliness and force. When the mind becomes accustomed to repeated patterns, it forms a natural expectation. This expectation does not arise from logical deduction, but from psychological conditioning. The more frequently two events are observed together, the stronger the expectation becomes. If someone has seen fire produce heat thousands of times, the mind automatically anticipates heat whenever fire appears. This anticipation feels rational, yet Hume insists it is rooted in custom. The mind has learned to move from one impression to another with confidence. This insight shifts philosophy away from abstract speculation and toward human psychology. Hume believed that to understand knowledge, one must first understand the mechanisms of the mind. The mind does not operate like a strict logical machine. It operates through association. He identified three main principles of association that connect ideas: resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect. Resemblance links similar ideas. A portrait brings to mind the person it resembles. Contiguity connects ideas that occur near each other in time or space. Thinking of a room brings to mind objects inside it. Cause and effect creates the strongest connection because repeated experience binds events together in expectation. Through these simple mechanisms, The complex structure of human thought is built. Memory connects past impressions. Imagination rearranges ideas into new combinations. Belief grows stronger when imagination is reinforced by repeated experience. Hume emphasized that imagination plays a much larger role in human life than people admit. Even when individuals believe they are reasoning carefully, imagination quietly shapes conclusions. Expectations about the world, trust in patterns, even personal identity rely on imaginative projection guided by habit. This becomes especially clear in Hume's analysis of personal identity. If the self is only a bundle of perceptions, then continuity depends on memory linking experiences together. Memory creates the feeling of sameness over time. Without memory, identity would dissolve into disconnected moments. Yet memory itself operates through association. It connects present ideas with past impressions through resemblance and contiguity. The self, therefore, becomes a narrative constructed by the mind's organizing habits. Hume does not deny that identity feels real. He simply shows that its foundation lies in psychological continuity rather than metaphysical substance. Turning again to morality, Hume develops one of his most influential claims. Reason alone cannot motivate action. Reason informs us about facts and relationships, but it does not generate desire. If someone knows that helping another person will relieve suffering, that knowledge alone does not compel action. The motivation arises from sympathy or concern. For Hume, morality emerges from sentiment. Humans naturally possess feelings of approval and disapproval towards certain behaviors. These feelings are not arbitrary. They arise from sympathy, the capacity to share and understand the emotions of others. When witnessing kindness, people feel warmth because they perceive the happiness it creates. When seeing cruelty, they feel discomfort because they sense harm. Moral judgment grows from this shared emotional responsiveness. This position challenges earlier philosophers who believe morality must be grounded in pure rational principles. Hume insists that without feeling, moral language would be empty. Saying an action is wrong expresses a sentiment of disapproval rather than stating a factual property existing independently in the world. However, Hume does not reduce morality to chaos. Although moral judgments arise from feeling, human sentiments are not entirely random. Because people share similar emotional capacities, societies develop common moral standards. Sympathy expands beyond immediate circles and allows cooperation among strangers. Hume also distinguishes between artificial and natural virtues. Natural virtues, such as kindness, arise directly from human emotional tendencies. Artificial virtues, such as justice, develop because society requires stable rules for cooperation. Property rights and promises may not arise spontaneously from instinct, but they become necessary for social stability. Justice, therefore, is not discovered as eternal truth, but constructed as useful practice. It becomes morally approved because it benefits society and supports human flourishing. Hume grounds ethics in practicality and shared sentiment rather than metaphysical command. He applies similar reasoning to religion. Rather than attacking belief emotionally, Hume analyzes how religious ideas form. He observes that humans naturally project familiar patterns onto the unknown. When faced with unpredictable events, people imagine invisible agents resembling human minds. Thunder becomes the expression of intention. Fortune becomes guided by will. Hume suggests that religion originates from fear and hope combined with imagination. When events seem threatening, humans seek explanation through agency. Over time, these imagined agents become organized into structured belief systems. He does not claim that belief in God is logically impossible. Instead, he argues that arguments attempting to prove divine attributes often exceed the limits of experience. When people infer infinite perfection from limited observation, they move beyond what evidence supports. Hume's approach encourages caution. Extraordinary claims require proportionate evidence. Belief should match the strength of supporting experience. Despite the skeptical tone of his philosophy, Hume does not advocate paralysis. He recognizes that humans cannot live without belief in cause and effect, identity, or morality. Custom guides daily action, whether philosophy approves or not. Even the skeptic returns to ordinary life after abstract reflection. This practical conclusion forms an important part of his thought. Philosophical doubt may reveal the limits of reason, but human nature continues functioning through habit and sentiment. Hume accepts this condition calmly. Instead of seeking impossible certainty, he suggests embracing modest understanding. From here, his philosophy deepens further into how skepticism and common life coexist, how reason and sentiment balance each other, and how accepting the limits of knowledge may lead not to despair, but to intellectual humility and psychological peace. As Hume continues refining his philosophy, he faces a delicate balance. On one side stands skepticism, the recognition that reason cannot justify many of the beliefs humans hold with confidence. On the other side stands ordinary life, where people naturally trust memory, expect the future to resemble the past, and rely on cause and effect without hesitation. The question becomes how these two can coexist. Hume does not recommend abandoning everyday belief. He observes that extreme skepticism collapses under its own weight. A philosopher may argue that causation cannot be logically proven, yet when stepping outside, that same philosopher instinctively avoids walking into traffic. Nature pulls the mind back into practical trust. He concludes that human nature is stronger than philosophical doubt. Even when reason shows its own limits, habit continues guiding life. This realization leads Hume to a calmer form of skepticism. Instead of attempting to destroy belief, he seeks to clarify its foundation. Beliefs remain useful and necessary, but they should be held with modesty rather than absolute certainty. This modesty becomes central to Hume's view of wisdom. The wise person recognizes the boundaries of reason. They avoid dogmatic claims about realities beyond experience. They proportion belief to evidence and remain open to correction. Intellectual humility replaces rigid conviction. Hume applies this attitude to debates about metaphysics. Philosophers often construct elaborate systems explaining ultimate reality, substance, or divine attributes. Hume questions whether such systems rest on impressions or merely on speculative imagination. If a concept cannot be traced back to experience, its meaning becomes doubtful. This does not mean that imagination is worthless. Hume acknowledges that imagination plays a creative role in human life. It allows storytelling, scientific hypothesis, artistic invention, and even social organization. The problem arises only when imagination disguises itself as certain knowledge. He encourages distinguishing between what can be experienced and what is inferred beyond experience. When this distinction remains clear, confusion decreases. Philosophy becomes grounded rather than abstract. Hume also examines human passions in greater depth. He argues that reason alone cannot oppose a passion directly. If someone strongly desires something, presenting logical arguments may inform them of consequences, but will not eliminate the desire itself. Only a stronger opposing passion can redirect behavior. For example, if someone desires unhealthy pleasure, knowledge of future harm may not stop them unless concern for well-being becomes emotionally stronger than immediate desire. Moral reform, therefore, depends on shaping sentiments rather than merely delivering rational instruction. This understanding leads Hume to see society as a system shaped by emotional forces. Sympathy, pride, ambition, fear, and affection interact to produce complex social patterns. Institutions arise because they channel these passions into stable forms. Take justice as an example. In small groups, natural affection may guide behavior. But as societies grow larger, personal attachment weakens. Rules regarding property and contracts become necessary. These rules are artificial in the sense that they are constructed, yet they are approved because they serve common interest. Approval of justice arises from recognition of its usefulness. People observe that stable property rights reduce conflict and increase prosperity. Through repeated experience, society develops moral approval for fairness and promise-keeping. Hume emphasizes that usefulness influences moral judgment. Traits that benefit society, such as honesty, industry, and benevolence, receive praise. Traits that harm society receive blame. Morality therefore reflects shared human interests grounded in sentiment. He also explores the idea of liberty within political life. Hume values stable government because stability allows commerce, education, and cooperation to flourish. Excessive political upheaval driven by abstract ideals can produce instability and suffering. Gradual improvement guided by experience appears wiser than radical transformation based purely on theory. Throughout his work, Hume resists extremes. He avoids both blind faith in reason and total rejection of belief. He avoids both moral relativism and rigid absolutism. His philosophy moves toward balance, shaped by observation of human nature. One of his most lasting contributions lies in separating what is from what ought to be. He noticed that many arguments shift from describing facts to prescribing moral conclusions without explanation. Observing that something happens does not automatically mean it should happen. The leap from fact to value requires emotional approval. This insight clarifies moral reasoning. Facts inform us about consequences and circumstances. Sentiment provides evaluation. Together, they shape ethical judgment. Hume's philosophy therefore presents a portrait of human beings as creatures guided by experience, habit, and feeling rather than pure logical deduction. Knowledge grows from repeated observation. Identity arises from memory linking perceptions. Morality emerges from shared sympathy. Social order develops from recognition of mutual benefit. Instead of searching for certainty beyond human capacity, Hume invites acceptance of the human condition. We are limited knowers operating through natural instinct and emotional response. Understanding these limits does not weaken life. It makes belief more careful and character more balanced. From this foundation, Hume moves toward his final reflections on how philosophical skepticism can coexist with everyday confidence, and how accepting the structure of human nature leads to a calmer and more tolerant outlook on knowledge, morality, and existence itself. As Hume brings his philosophy to its final depth, he does not attempt to escape skepticism by inventing new certainties. Instead, he asks a gentler question. How should a human being live once they understand the limits of reason? After examining cause and effect, personal identity, religion, morality, and political life, Hume arrives at a quiet conclusion. Human knowledge is powerful but limited. Reason can analyze relationships between ideas and observe patterns in experience. It cannot step outside experience to secure absolute foundations. Much of what we rely on rests not on logical proof, but on habit, instinct, and shared sentiment. For some thinkers, this realization would feel disturbing. If causation cannot be logically proven and the self is only a bundle of perceptions, then certainty appears fragile. But Hume does not end in despair. He observes that human nature itself prevents total collapse into doubt. Even after deep philosophical reflection, a person grows hungry, enjoys conversation, laughs with friends, feels concern for others, and expects the sun to rise. Natural instinct quietly reasserts itself. The mind returns to belief because belief is part of its structure. Hume therefore distinguishes between excessive philosophical skepticism and moderate skepticism. Excessive skepticism attempts to question everything continuously, paralyzing action. Moderate skepticism accepts that while ultimate certainty may be unreachable, practical belief remains justified through experience and usefulness. The wise person, in Hume's view, becomes intellectually humble. They proportion belief to evidence. They avoid dogmatic claims about matters beyond experience. They recognize that human understanding evolves and remains open to revision. This humility encourages tolerance. If our beliefs rest partly on custom and sentiment, then disagreement becomes less threatening. Others may hold different views not because they are irrational, but because they have experienced different influences and associations. Awareness of this softens judgment and reduces hostility. Hume also emphasizes the importance of common life. Philosophical reflection should not detach a person from ordinary existence. Instead, it should clarify it. After abstract reasoning, one returns to simple pleasures and social bonds with greater appreciation. Friendship, conversation, study, and moderate enjoyment form the texture of a balanced life. Hume valued calm reflection over intense fanaticism. He saw extreme enthusiasm, whether religious or political, as dangerous because it often ignores evidence and inflames passion beyond reason. He believed human happiness depends less on discovering ultimate metaphysical truths and more on cultivating balanced character. Since reason alone cannot govern action, shaping healthy sentiments becomes essential. Education, art, and social interaction gradually refine emotional responses. Sympathy remains central. Humans naturally resonate with the feelings of others. This shared emotional capacity forms the foundation of morality and cooperation. Expanding sympathy beyond narrow circles strengthens society and reduces cruelty. Hume's philosophy ultimately reshapes the idea of wisdom. Wisdom is not possession of absolute knowledge. It is understanding the operations of one's own mind. It is recognizing how habit forms belief, how sentiment shapes judgment, and how limited evidence supports even strong conviction. When someone understands these processes, arrogance fades. They speak carefully. They listen patiently. They remain open to correction. Their confidence becomes steady but not rigid. Even religious belief, for Hume, should be approached with this calm attitude. Rather than aggressive denial or blind acceptance, one examines evidence carefully and resists claims that exceed experience. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary support. At the same time, he recognizes that belief often fulfills emotional needs. Understanding this psychological dimension reduces hostility between belief and doubt. The philosopher does not mock human tendency toward hope, but studies it compassionately. Hume's view of the self also contributes to peace. If identity is a flowing bundle of perceptions rather than a fixed essence, then change becomes natural rather than threatening. People evolve through shifting experiences. Clinging rigidly to permanent identity creates unnecessary tension. Life appears as a continuous stream shaped by memory and expectation. Accepting this fluidity reduces fear of transformation. The self becomes dynamic rather than fragile. In the end, Hume offers neither dramatic revelation nor grand metaphysical system. His philosophy is quieter. It asks us to examine experience carefully, to distrust unsupported speculation, to balance reason with sentiment, and to accept the natural structure of human understanding. To think like Hume means asking where each idea originates. It means tracing beliefs back to impressions and testing their strength. It means holding conviction with moderation and allowing evidence to guide judgment. It means recognizing that custom shapes expectation and that sympathy shapes morality. Most of all, it means living with thoughtful humility. The world may not provide absolute certainty, yet it offers enough stability through experience to guide action. Within those limits, humans can cultivate kindness, curiosity, and measured confidence. Understanding the boundaries of reason does not shrink life. It clarifies it. It replaces dogmatism with balance and replaces rigid certainty with reflective calm. And in that calm awareness of how the mind works, the human being finds not perfect knowledge, but a steady and thoughtful way of existing within the world as it is experienced.